Good afternoon, everybody, and so sorry for the delay. We had technical difficulties. You know, we've heard that all of our lives, but it was actually true this afternoon, and I know it's been true for many of us over the last 10 weeks. I'm Jenny LeRae, the Vice President for Strategy and Communications at Research America, and we really appreciate your joining us for another of our Alliance member web meetings. We hope that you're continuing to find the series of webinars and web meetings we've been doing over the past 10 weeks, hoping that you're continuing to find them helpful. As always, we're very open to suggestions for topics and speakers. You know the drill. Before we get started, Anna, if you could go to the next screen. Please keep your lines muted. Questions put in the chat box, and Terry Schwartzbeck will read those out loud at the end. And for those of you dialing in by phone, we'll open up the phone lines after the discussion, and you can hit *6 to unmute and ask a question. So today we have two terrific guest speakers from the VA who are focused on innovation for patients and will provide us an update on how the VA is part of the research ecosystem. Dr. Carolyn Clancy is the Deputy Undersecretary for Discovery, Education, and Affiliate Networks. Maybe they call you the Dean, Dr. Clancy. Prior to this position,
absolutely they do.
Prior to this position, she was the Deputy Undersecretary for Health at VHA and oversaw quality, safety, risk management, and a number of very key issues. And many of us worked with her when she served as director for the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality for at least a decade. Our next guest is her colleague, Dr. Rachel Ramoni. Dr. Ramoni is the Chief Research and Development Officer for the Department of Veterans Affairs. She assumed her role 3 years ago. She's responsible for developing and executing the VA's research strategy, which encompasses more than 2,200 active projects at more than 100 sites. Their research is supported by a nearly $2 billion budget, that's FY 2019, which includes direct support from the VA as well as other outside entities such as NIH. We're so pleased to have you both here today, and I am now going to turn it over to you.
Great. So can you put up the title slide, please? Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Carolyn Clancy, and I really want to thank Research America for organizing this today. You know, this has been, obviously, to use an overstated word, an unprecedented time in our history. So I've been rereading The Great Influenza, and it feels a lot like that. The details are different, and sometimes our information is coming at warp speed. But what's been really, really exciting about this really is how rapidly Dr. Ramoni and her colleagues have just sprung into action. In part because we know so little, and we really want to make sure that veterans get the best possible care, but they have not wasted a minute. I've also learned in our new virtual world that it turns out that Rachel and I have completely diametrically opposed biological time clocks. So what that means, since she's a night owl, is every morning I wake up to great news. It is just a terrific way to live. But mostly I want to thank Research America for keeping all of us connected during a time when it's pretty easy to feel somewhat isolated, and I can't think of a time when research and science could be more important to this country and, frankly, to the world. So if you could show the next slide. Now, our inspiration at VA is really the veterans that we have the privilege of serving. No one goes into research without wanting to help people. That's really the inspiration that keeps many, many people motivated. But for us, this is very much part of core business. The photo here is a veteran who has recovered from a long-ish hospital stay due to COVID-19, and you can see all the people clapping and applauding that he is finally on his way to continue his recovery at home. So the notion that the research that we're doing is important to the veterans we're serving every day across this vast system is never far from our brains at all. Next slide, please. As Jenny alluded to when she opened, this is a big system, but of our 170 medical centers, about 105 are active research sites, and we are all across the continental U.S., Alaska, Hawaii. We even have clinics in Guam and Samoa, but that would be a topic for another day. But there's a huge array of researchers, and all of this was put into motion about 75 years ago because the science that we are supporting and conducting is very much all about improving veterans' care. So you can see our total congressional appropriation for VA medical and prosthetic research, how many active funded projects, and how many active funded principal investigators. And then underneath what looks like a bag of money, is actually the total research budget, by which we mean VA funding plus the fact that all of our researchers, the vast majority of whom have academic appointments at one of our academic affiliates, and are also supported by NIH, the Department of Defense, foundations, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, and so forth. So it is a vast enterprise, and to unleash and unharness the power of that for veterans and people suffering from COVID-19 has been really, really exciting. I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to take the next several slides. Rachel.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for finding the time to hear from us today. Next slide, please. So when I came into this role directly from academia, I set 3 priorities, which were to increase veterans' access to high-quality clinical trials and increase the real-world impact of VA research, and then put our huge amounts of VA data to work for veterans. We had I have to say, somewhat justified reputation for being challenging to work with, which isn't surprising for a system that has over 300,000 employees. We've worked hard to become a partner of choice for conducting high-quality clinical trials, both with industry and with other federal agencies. And 2 years ago, when we launched the Access to Clinical Trials for Veterans, along with our partners, NAVREF, who I think the executive director is on the line. So hello, Rick Stars, and Longevity, and Cohen Veterans Bioscience, and Us Against Alzheimer's. We were starting with a startup time of 285 days for multi-site industry-sponsored trials. And in the early days of the pandemic, we started up one in 4 days, which included 2 days of a weekend. So it's been quite the turnaround that has occurred over the last 2 years. And being a research enterprise embedded in the largest healthcare system in the country, we work hand in hand with our clinical partners to keep the learning health cycle going. And really being under the dean, Carolyn, has been incredibly useful in bridging the gap between the clinic and research. We're much more integrated into the healthcare system now. So a few ways we're doing this in the era of COVID is to conduct analyses on repurposing drugs using our vast clinical data set, and the fact that well over 11,000 veterans now in our system have tested positive for COVID-19. And because we're such a large system, this information is not only useful to VA and our pharmacy benefits program, but also we're an information source for the FDA as well. And so these are just some of the ways that we are putting VA data to work for veterans and also for our entire nation. And for us, success is when we reach patients and impact patients, not just upon publication. So next slide. And do you want me to go through this, Carolyn, or would you like to take it from here?
This one and the next one, and then I'll
right.
pick up at VA research at
Fantastic. One of the reasons why I'm wearing this jacket is to cover the bruise marks I have from pinching myself for being so lucky to lead the research arm of our nation's largest integrated healthcare system. Multisite trials, though, are old hat for VA, reaching back almost to the earliest days of VA research, beginning in the 1940s with the first multi-site study in the United States that was a trial looking at tuberculosis. And just to show the power and the scale of what we can do, we currently are conducting a study of 50,000 veterans over 10 years to look at the differences between once in every 10 years colonoscopy versus once a year fecal immunochemical testing. In addition to having been the organization that through a clinical trial of over 36,000 people led to the approval of the first shingles vaccine. Next slide. So one of the reasons why it's so important for us to do clinical trials in our population is that the veteran population has a distinct set of characteristics. And so we want to ensure the safety and effectiveness of therapeutics within this special population. So for this reason, we're conducting quite a few COVID-19 clinical trials. We have an especially vulnerable population, very diverse background socioeconomically, an older population with multiple risk factors. And so the wonderful thing, though, is that in addition to serving our veterans, the clinical trials we've done have influenced the entire country, as was exemplified in the shingles trial and that trial of 50,000 veterans. And because we have this amazing infrastructure already set up, we can respond to the fierce urgency of now with rigor and are able to do high quality trials quickly. Next slide, please.
Next slide. So, it's almost impossible to overstate how large our system is. My personal favorite example is we actually have an outpatient clinic in a town called Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. It is my aspiration to get there at one day while I'm still working here, but haven't made it there yet. But literally all across the country. And frankly, we have a lot of advantages from being a system. We've had good electronic data for over 20 years. Now we are shifting to a commercial electronic health record sometime in the future. It's obviously on pause right now for the pandemic. But as Rachel noted, we are the largest integrated system in the U.S., and we have a lot of geographic and demographic diversity. If 1 in 5 Americans lives in a rural area in this country, it's about 1 in 3 of the veterans that we serve, which is quite remarkable. So improving veterans care isn't just about getting it to their clinicians. It's also trying to figure out how do we get it to people who may live literally a couple hundred miles from their nearest VA medical center. So telehealth has been a very, very big part of this system. And obviously, like just about every other healthcare system in the U.S. right now, in the context of COVID-19, we have expanded that dramatically, but we were starting way down the field, if you will, just based on past experience over about a dozen years. We have very, very large data sets just because we have about 9 million veterans enrolled in this system, about 6 million of whom are active users. And we have researchers, many of whom see veterans themselves at some point in their working day clinically, and many of whom, about 70% of the doctors who work in this system, are also faculty members at the nation's top medical centers and other universities, which is pretty amazing. And how this got started was at the end of World War II, the general who was running VA, which was then not a cabinet department, had a lot of sick people coming back who clearly were being discharged from their time in service, and very, very few beds and facilities. But being a general, they think like this, right? He called in all the nation's medical school deans. And since that time, and this year is the 75th anniversary, we have been affiliated with all of the medical schools, the osteopathic schools, as well as many, many other schools for nursing, pharmacy, occupational and physical therapy. The list goes on and on. But it is a very, very rich relationship, which we believe brings value to veterans and, frankly, the entire country. And it also means that, particularly under Rachel's leadership, absolutely insisting that we not only have the capacity to fund multi-site clinical studies, but we do so in a way not knowing that we were going to have a pandemic, but that we could do it in a timely basis. And that has been incredibly gratifying to see. So you can see some photos here of some of our clinicians. Interestingly, you can see at least one is in a face shield, which actually some of our people are making for their colleagues with 3D printers, but that would be a topic for another day. But that's a collaboration between our research group and our innovations group. Next slide. So just to give you an example, and frankly, even if I used 4 slides to list all of the work we're involved in with COVID-19, I would skip something. So I'm just trying to hit some of the very big high points. First is that we have allowed expanded access, also known as compassionate use, to the Mayo Clinic convalescent plasma protocol at more than 80 VA medical centers. Now, that sounds like an easy thing to do, but it turns out that because we have a privacy law that most private sector institutions don't, we actually had to have a little addendum to the consent form and so forth. But that's fine. And already we have seen some veterans benefit from that enormously. So we're very, very excited about that. We have a clinical trial in process, which is called HITCH, which is testing a prostate cancer drug. I don't even know how to pronounce this, Degarelix, as COVID-19 treatment, which I think will be really, really interesting. It's an androgen deprivation agent. And, just as we were first starting to telework, so we're talking early to mid-March, one of the leaders of our veteran service organization, Vietnam Veterans, sent me a paper published probably in 16 or 17 showing that other coronaviruses, men were more susceptible than women. So I'm really, really interested in this trial. We recently announced that along with our colleagues in the Department of Defense, we are supporting a 4-year observational study. One of the big challenges in healthcare is, in theory, we've got data on everyone since there's more and more electronic health records, like literally everywhere. Unfortunately, being able to follow patients as they move from one setting to another, are discharged home, and then go on to recuperate and know how long that took and how long was it before that they were back to something and what kinds of complications did they have, is something that I think we desperately need to know about for future pandemics, and it seems quite likely that we will have that. We're also working very closely with what we fondly think of as Tony's Institute for a sponsored trial of remdesivir, plus I can definitely not say that the name of that anti-inflammatory medication. And in addition to that, I've been exhausted over the past several months because there's medical information being beamed in literally from around the globe. And the question is a lot of descriptive work. Which of these information studies are useful and which are not? So our evidence synthesis program is actually supporting rapid reviews. What do we know, for example, about remote monitoring devices? Now, the answer to that question turns out to be almost nothing. But nonetheless, I think that that's going to be an area where we will be learning more. And their work, in turn, are also working closely with the World Health Organization so that they are not, creating non-productive redundancy. Very, very interestingly, every week for 2 or 3 meetings a week, we have a meeting of what's called the COVID Insights Task Force. And this is actually a collaboration. We had already been working with the Department of Energy because they've got very, very high-speed computing capability at Oak Ridge National Laboratories, as well as some others, to actually for them to help us analyze the data that we've collected from about 800,000 veterans. MVP stands for Million Veteran Program, although we have no intention of stopping at a million veterans. Obviously, enrollment is paused right at the moment, but we expect that will pick up. But in addition to working with the Department of Energy, we're also working with FDA, with HHS, and with people from the National Security Council. And I think we've just barely begun to glimpse what is possible from collaborating with multiple partners who've got huge amounts of data in combination with this really incredible capability in research. So again, this is just a few snapshots. We would be happy to come back for the 3-hour appendix follow-up for details on this, but it's very, very exciting work. Next slide. So this is just a map, because we are a large system and are literally across this country. We make maps for almost everything, which is quite interesting, including like who's got what personal protective equipment and so forth. This is literally part of the fabric of the workday here. But what you're seeing here, denoted by the size of the circle, is where we've got active research going on around COVID-19. So you can see that it is a pretty good representation across the country. I'm quite confident that we'll figure out how to engage Montana and Wyoming in the not too distant future, but a lot of just amazing work going on. Next slide. And so, the point is that not only are we conducting and supporting this research, and trying to make it as easy and as rapid as possible so that the benefits of that research can be delivered to veterans in a timely fashion. But now we're getting our operations colleagues who are saying, what do you got on this topic? Are the people who have acute respiratory distress syndrome, are they really like those people, with other pulmonary problems and so on and so forth? So it's always, my current position has been exciting. I've been in it for almost 2 years in July, but this has just put it on warp speed. And I couldn't be prouder to work with Dr. Ramoni and her team. I mean, they are utterly, utterly amazing. So with that, we'll pause and very much looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Clancy and Dr. Ramoni. What a great presentation. And because the VA is what we often say is a closed system, I mean, many of us don't really fully comprehend the extent of the research that you're doing day to day, and how important you are to the whole, research enterprise. So it was really great to take us through that, particularly as it relates to COVID-19. Why don't I start off with the first question? And Terry, I'm assuming we have some in the chat box. One area that you didn't mention, Dr. Clancy, in terms of COVID research was vaccines. And if you did, I apologize. But if you could talk a little bit more about whether or not the VA expects to be involved in vaccine research for COVID-19.
I will start this and then hand it off to Rachel, particularly if I say something incorrect. We are involved in active discussions. That would be the royal we, the way I'm using that pronoun. That would be Dr. Ramoni, with a number of companies and also working with colleagues from BARDA, FDA, and so forth, and also with the public-private collaboration being spearheaded by NIH. So yes, we do expect that for phase 2 and phase 3 studies, that a number of our sites may be interested. And frankly, we're actually getting questions already from some of those sites like, when can we start? We want to be part of this, which is wonderful.
Very good. Terry, do we have questions from our audience?
Yes, we definitely do. And just a reminder to the audience, you can click on the questions box in the little dashboard and type in your questions there. One question so far, what kind of research, you talked a little bit about this, but can you talk more about research related to the increase in telehealth and benefits for access and continuity of care for veterans? Do you see potential for expansion?
Absolutely. And I will tell you that along with the biomedical research that we've been describing thus far, we have a very robust health services research and development program. And they too were like racing out of the gate to launch what felt like a record-breaking time, targeted solicitation. And I think that they've actually made some awards. I mean, this has been far, far more rapid than they'd planned. And it's interesting, this issue of remote monitoring is one that I'm finding particularly fascinating. So it turned out, for example, we had an application that had scored very, very well that came in looking at the use of various wearable devices so that you could be monitoring patients' blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rate, as well as their oxygen level and so forth while they're recuperating at home. He was actually looking at this for a number of ongoing chronic medical illnesses. And almost before we could even ask the question, he wanted to know, could he reframe that as being about COVID? Because in some of our facilities, they've had such high demand for intensive care beds that they have been discharging people, sometimes with a pulse oximeter and so forth. But many people believe that this is going to be a future path. I know a number of private systems are using it, but as I noted earlier, we have no evidence whatsoever, so we're really looking forward to contributing to that. By and large, the response to virtual care has been pretty good. For a few weeks, I was worried. We have operations meetings twice a day where we're looking at the number of encounters and so forth, and the mental health encounters were kind of down for maybe a couple of weeks, and then they picked right back up again. And given what we know about the impact on mental and behavioral health of a lot of these public health emergencies, that was a time to heave at least an intermittent sigh of relief. Obviously, there are probably many people who are isolated at home that we haven't been able to reach, but by George, we are doing our utmost best to do that. A lot of that, of course, to be fair, is phone calls. But nonetheless, a whole lot of it is video connect, and it's been really amazing to see our staff very, very excited when they've been able to talk a veteran who never wanted to do a telehealth encounter into just trying this app, and it's worked like a charm.
Great, thank you. Terry, do you have other
Oh,
questions?
yes. Yep, lots more questions coming in. One question, how is the veteran population similar to and different from the general population in the US in terms of their health needs? And does that impact the generalizability of your clinical trial findings?
So in general, the veteran population is going to be older, sicker, and probably not as well off as the general population. The criteria for being eligible for our system fall into two broad categories. One is service disabilities, which could be a result of an injury or trauma that you experienced during service, and might also be because of an exposure that you had during service. And the other is income. So in general, we're going to be seeing poorer people. The study that has gotten more airtime and still has not actually been published or peer-reviewed, to the best of my knowledge, about where investigators used VA data to look at the early experience with hydroxychloroquine, found that the median age was above 65. Now, this was the hospitalized patients. Women are a growing proportion of our population, but still very small numbers, about 10% ballpark. That will pick up, but we've got a lot of work to do. It means that we were also very attentive early on to nursing home issues. We have a lot of what we call community living centers, and you could not visit one of our facilities without getting a tour of the community living center. Our directors and leadership are very, very proud of them. And we figured out very, very early on, based on the experience in Seattle with the outbreak in that particular nursing home, that we needed to ultimately test all of the patients. And we've got some research going on there because for all the numbers we're hearing about nursing home patients, it's clear nursing homes are a big source of a problem for COVID, but nobody's counting the same way. So we're looking for opportunities to do that. But we restricted visitors, I want to say, in mid-March, and also started testing all veterans and staff and have reached out to the state veterans homes. And in some states, we've also reached out to private sector nursing homes at the request of the governor and so forth.
Great, thank you so much. Another question. This one is directed at Dr. Ramoni, but I'm sure both of you can take it. Can you talk about the Paperwork Reduction Act and any barriers it has for conducting research within the VA?
All yours,
Well,
Rachel.
thank you for that question. It's something I dream about, is to have the same consideration with regard to the Paperwork Reduction Act that NIH enjoys. So it presents a real barrier in general for VA research, because we have to go through a quite arduous process to get surveys approved, and so we would more than love to have the same consideration as NIH. As I understand it, there has been some progress with regard to COVID-related research, but we're really thinking about the broader set of research, such as the important suicide prevention research that we do and others. And just to give you a sense of the time that can go into putting in one of these Paperwork Reduction Act processes, it can be upwards of 18 months. So it's hard to be agile and responsive in that with those sorts of timelines, but I really appreciate the question.
Great, thank you. And another question from our own CEO and President, Mary Woolley. In addition to ramping up telehealth, can you speculate on any of the other sort of silver linings the VA research program has learned during the pandemic? Maybe new ways of doing things that are better and could be made the new normal?
Oh, I think that we're learning a ton, some of which has to do with outreach to people living at home and maybe sort of isolated. Now, this is not anything new and predates the pandemic for sure. And if you're familiar with the former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy's new book that recently came out about this, my favorite statistic is saying basically that being lonely is the equivalent of smoking a half a pack of cigarettes a day in terms of its impact on your health. I have no idea if this is correct, but boy, in terms of focusing your attention on a particular issue, the obvious medical issues seem pretty self-evident, but, being able to reach some of these people telephonically and as well as virtually with telehealth and so forth makes a really, really big difference. And by the way, our people, don't rest just thinking about their medical problems. They're also thinking about the social determinants issues in terms of who needs food and can't go out now to a food bank, or the people from the food bank can't deliver to them. So, it turns out that like many healthcare institutions, a lot of our facilities have contracts with Uber and Lyft. So some of our innovations people jumped in to figure out how to leverage those contacts so that the veterans could have the food brought to them and so forth. And by the way, when they get the food brought to them, they actually get to interact with another human. And we've seen that in some studies of suicide prevention, that this idea of caring contacts makes a very, very big difference.
Terrific. Terry, I think you have a few more questions, but I'm going to jump in and ask one. So the VA is known for some really impactful public-private partnerships in your research, particularly with regard to innovative medical devices and treatments. Could you talk a little bit about how you work with industry and how you're working with industry now?
First of all, they're often interested in, and this is everything from, pharmaceutical industries to Google, right? Developing big models and so forth, because the real end game is, does this make a difference? I don't mean to diminish the value of mining all kinds of data, and Lord knows they've got a ton. But the real question is, does it actually change the trajectory of care and function and so forth for individuals? So a lot of partnerships. Several years ago, when Bob McDonnell was secretary, he really got the idea that we needed to be much more receptive to these partnerships. So we actually have an executive director for the Secretary's Center for Strategic Partnerships. And the only open question I have in my mind is, who is more energetic and does more with hours in a day? Would that be Rachel Ramoni or Deborah Scher, our partner in crime in many of these things? And it's amazing because, some of these companies have come up with little devices. For example, if you are a patient with severe pulmonary disease and you've got one of those complicated masks on, it can be really complicated and hard to hear when you're trying to speak to the doctor. Well, someone has come up with a little gizmo that you put on the front of one of these masks, and it's like a non-distorting microphone. Like, who thinks of these things? It's really amazing. So the company actually sent us a short video, and we had people almost jumping out of their chairs.
Huh.
That's like a parachute, right? You don't need a study to see if it's going to work. The benefits are so obvious. But many other companies are interested in working with us on devices, sometimes on prosthetics, and figuring out how to make that better. And prosthetics is a very big part of our business, both clinically and in terms of research. So it's impossible to overstate just how much exciting work is going on.
Thank you. Terry, I think we've
Great.
got some other good questions on the board.
We sure do. Can you talk a little bit about the non-COVID-19 research that we can assume has been put on hold? Do you anticipate bringing it back online soon?
Rachel?
Yeah, so I was myself surprised to find out that we're receiving the same number of applications through our usual funding mechanisms as we were pre-COVID. So our investigators still are managing to put together their research. Of course, there will be longer term consequences to this pandemic, because naturally some of the in-person research did need to be put on hold for the safety of those veterans and our research staff and the entire VA Medical Center. And so we're envisioning that some of these projects will have longer budgetary tails than they did, and we hope to keep up, given the continued interest by our investigators, we hope to keep up our funding rate that we have been doing. In addition, I'm a big fan of creating enterprise-wide infrastructure and capabilities, and COVID-19 has highlighted the utility of really having these VA enterprise-wide capabilities versus capabilities isolated at the 100+ VA medical centers that conduct research. And so you can be looking to us to make some larger infrastructure moves in the future to make us a better partner and a more effective translator of research.
Great. Another question that has come in, is the VA doing any research related to social distancing? There's a lot of questions about effectiveness. There's a lot that we still don't know. Are you conducting any studies in that arena?
To the best of my knowledge, no. And, some of the models that we're hearing about, and we spend a great deal of time, we collectively studying various models and trying to figure out what are going to be the next hotspots. And since our secretary is on the White House Task Force, we get regular reports from there as well. Although it's an imperfect science, to say the least. But the recent reports that if we had started safer at home or stay at home policies a week or two earlier, what that might have translated into fewer deaths is really interesting. We have not been doing that work. We've certainly heard a lot from some of our partners about the apps that they are developing and so forth. And I'm sure all of us share a sense of both relief to be able to get a haircut, which is one reason I'm glad I'm not on in a photo, because the contrast between what I look like now and that original photo is just too glaring even for me. But that's pretty trivial stuff. But wondering, are people going to feel so relieved because it's summer and it's nice out and the days are long and so forth that they will kind of forget about social distancing? And we've all seen the same news reports. I think is going to be a very, very big question. But I don't believe, Rachel, that we're specifically focused on any of that now, are we?
Well, I will add that while it's true that I don't believe any of our researchers are focused themselves on this work, a number of other agencies have been reaching out to us, having taken note that we're what I think is the best kept secret in clinical research. So we will be partnering with the MIDAS group out of NIGMS, and they work on modeling infections. And so we put them in touch with a number of researchers within our organization, and I expect that what the questioner brought up will be among the topics that VA participates in.
I'm going to, excuse me, I'm going to throw out one more question, and then I think we will let you very busy women go back to your work. So you talked about ramping up telehealth in the context of the pandemic, and also you talked about, Dr. Ramoni, some of your enterprise-wide solutions. Are there any other silver linings that the VA research program has learned during the pandemic? Maybe new ways of doing things that are better, faster, more efficient, and could be made the new normal, if we ever get back to the new normal, that is.
Well, I would say depending on how broadly, go.
So I'll just start with something I'm pretty excited about. As Carolyn mentioned, a number of our veterans live in rural areas, and so the differences in access to care between rural Americans and those who live in urban and suburban areas have been center in my mind for some time now. And so what I'm most excited about and what we're learning from this experience is the ability to bring trials to the veterans. So many more virtual clinical trials leveraging technology, telehealth, and also new regulatory approaches to these studies. So that's the silver lining I see.
One last question. Oh, Dr. Clancy, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just to build on the telehealth, depending on how narrowly or broadly you define it, a lot of it comes back to, as Rachel said, both clinically and in terms of research, bringing it to the veteran. Now, we have challenges in some areas just because of the availability of broadband. And if there's one area where I'd like to work more with partners, it would be bringing some of that capability into people's homes. Mm-hmm. I will say we've been working with Philips and a number of other big telecom carriers to bring a specialized pod. So you got to think of a Mammoth, right? But this is a pod dropped into like a VFW hall, where veterans who live like way out in the middle of the nowhere, for example, near the Canadian border in Montana, and who would have like at least several hundred miles to travel to a VA facility, or even 100 or so to go to one of our little tiny clinics where they could do telehealth from there, can now go to the VFW hall and get their care. But again, I think actually getting it to where people are, and I think that we're going to be ahead of a lot of U.S. healthcare, but that's actually going to be a big, big game changer. But we don't have to worry about the licensing issue or the reimbursement. So that gives us quite a bit of accelerant.
Terrific. Here's my last question, which is those of us who are outside of the VA system, how do we learn about your latest medical research? How do you disseminate your research findings?
Well, obviously, many of our investigators have academic appointments, so, publication and contributing to the broader knowledge is very important. And on occasion, we do press releases and so forth. And we've also, I think, over the past several years, done more of these satellite radio tours, which is a way that some people hear about it. We're open to new ideas, and which is why I considered today's discussion such a great opportunity. We've got a lot of good stories to tell, especially in this area of the enterprise. We do not excel at telling it well. So again, people have ideas or to give us a boost, blast away.
Well, that is a perfect place. Oh, please, Dr. Ramoni.
I'll just add that I would ask people to follow us on Twitter, which is @VA Research. Pretty easy to remember, and that would be a good place to hear what we're up to.
That's terrific. Well, what a great place to end. You're not the only federal agency that is doing amazing work that isn't getting that word out as much as it should. So we at Research America want to help you with that, and are so glad that you could join us this afternoon. So thank you. Thank you, Dr. Clancy, Dr. Ramoni. What a terrific discussion. And we do look forward to highlighting the great work that you're doing. And if we're not following you on Twitter, I'm assuming we are, but we will start today. So I hope those of us who are attending today's webinar, I hope you can also join us on Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for our next Alliance member call. We will hear from Dr. Josh Gordon, who is the director of the National Institute of Mental Health, and he'll be talking about the range of mental health implications of the pandemic and what we can do to address them. So with that, I hope everyone has some downtime this weekend, and wherever you are calling in from, you enjoy good weather. Thank you for joining us, and please stay in touch.
Thanks so much, Jenny, and thanks to everyone for making the time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.